One of the most common questions I likely get asked on the internet is, I've injured this part of my body, what should I do to recover? Honestly, most of the time it's more about things you shouldn't be doing in those early days that's actually delaying your recovery. So in this video, I'm going to highlight 5 things that people tend to think they should be doing early stage on, and it actually can make the injury worse. Of course, you can integrate them later on in your rehab, and I'll also explain when the right time is for that. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Maryke. I'm one of the physiotherapists from sportsinjuryphysio.com, where you can get online physiotherapy assessment as well as treatment of any type of sports injury, all done via video call. Now, one of the most common questions we get is, how can you actually assess or treat me if you're not in the same room as me? I know that sounds weird, but the types of injuries we specialize in, especially tendons, are really well suited to assess as well as demonstrate rehab exercises and things for via video call. So if you're interested in this service, have a look at the description. I've put a link to the website there. You can easily remember the 5 things to avoid during the early stages of an injury with the word harms. The H stands for heat, A for alcohol, R for running, but you can insert any sports there. I'll explain a little bit more about that. Then the M is for massage and the S is for stretching. So let's look at each of these in particular as it applies to tears and strains as well as tendinopathies actually. H stands for heat. Why is heat not a good idea during early stages of an injury? Well, let's separate them between pulls, strains and tears versus tendinopathy or tendonitis. If we think of something that you've pulled or strained or torn, all of those terms refer to a stretch type injury. Rupture, the same thing. And when you have a stretch injury, it means that some of the fibers, whatever structure it is, so it may be muscle fibers if you've torn a muscle or pulled a muscle, or ligament fibers or tendon fibers, doesn't matter what, some of the fibers would have torn. And also some of the little blood vessels in that area. And that's what causes the internal bleeding and then a bit of swelling and things to develop. Now, if you've torn a large blood vessel or quite a few of the small ones, you may get significant amounts of swelling coming up immediately. If you've only torn a few of the smaller ones, you may just see a bit of mild swelling coming out. The problem with heat is that it increases your circulation. And because those blood vessels are now a little bit damaged in that area, it will take them a few days to recover. And if you increase the circulation too dramatically, you can cause them to start bleeding again. And that can cause what we call a secondary injury. So the first injury had a certain amount of damage, but now because it causes excessive bleeding and swelling in the area when you apply the heat, it can cause more pressure there, which then also causes secondary injury. So it actually makes your injury worse. So it's best during the first 48 to 72 hours often to rather apply ice than heat. But I would say if you've had quite a significant pull or tear injury, I would stay away from heat for at least 7 days or even longer perhaps. But 7 days is usually a good time. After that period, you can start applying heat if you need it. It's not going to speed up your healing. Ice is also not going to speed up your healing, but it can help with some discomfort and pain. If we think of tendinopathies or tendonitis, in that case, nothing is torn, so there's no blood vessels that's been damaged. But what does happen is, if your tendon only became painful in the last couple of days, it's something we call a reactive tendinopathy. And in that stage, there often is a bit of inflammation involved. Now, inflammation is absolutely fine, and actually it's part of the healing process. So we don't want to suppress it necessarily, but we also don't want to amplify it. And the problem with heat is that it can sometimes make inflammation worse. So you don't really want to apply a lot of heat at that point as treatment, because then you can actually make the tendon more irritated than what it would have been otherwise. So if your tendon only became painful in the last couple of weeks, I would rather opt for cold if you need it for pain rather than heat. But if you've had your tendon pain for more than 2 weeks and it's not a recent flare-up, then it doesn't really matter. You can use heat or you can use ice, it doesn't matter. If you want more advice on specifically how to apply ice safely for any type of injury, have a look at the description. I'll put a link to a video we have about that topic there. There are 3 reasons why staying away from alcohol, especially during the early stages of your injury, is a good idea. And the first is that alcohol is a blood thinner. So if you've just pulled something or strained it or torn it and you drink within the first 24, 48 hours, quite excessively especially, then you can actually increase the bleeding again and you can make your injury worse. And this is especially important if you've had a concussion or a head injury. So if you've played any type of sports where you got a hit against the head, then it can actually be really dangerous because you may have a small bleed in the brain. And if you then drink alcohol, that can make it worse and actually cause trouble where it wouldn't have caused trouble otherwise. So definitely if you've had a concussion, do not drink alcohol during that period. But if you've just torn something, then it's likely a good idea to also stay away from it. Then obviously there isn't any bleeding when we get to a tendinopathy or tendinitis. But again, alcohol, especially large volumes of alcohol, has been shown to increase your chronic inflammation in your body. So it could potentially make things a little bit worse like that, but it's not that hectic. What I will say is what I've seen in the past is the main problem with the alcohol for tendinopathies is that it makes you forget that you have an injury because it's a painkiller. And then my patients do things that they wouldn't have done otherwise. So dance very wildly or forget that they couldn't jump or shouldn't be jumping up and down. And then they make their injury worse. So for that reason, it can sometimes be a good idea to also stay away from alcohol. I chose R for running just because it works well with the word harms to remember the 5 things, but you can insert any type of sport instead of running. And what I mean with this is, especially for tears or strains, that it's not a good idea to try when you pull something, continue with a session because you will likely make it worse. As an example, last Thursday I was doing some interval training, and this is actually what made me think of the video. And as I did my 5th repetition, I felt what felt like a strong cramp in my hamstring. And I realized immediately, I've seen enough patients to know this is not going to be just a cramp. This is likely going to be a tear. So I stopped training. I tried to walk it off and it wasn't going anywhere, which meant that, yeah, I probably strained something. So then I finished the session and just walked home. Because I stopped that quickly and didn't try to run through it and see if I could do one more a little bit slower maybe, it wasn't that bad a strain. And yesterday, which was 3 days later, I could actually already do a run walk. Now, had I tried to do another session or another repetition, I might have then strained it even worse, and then my recovery would have taken so much longer. And the reason for this is as soon as you have that pulling injury, it means that structure is now not as strong as it used to be. So even a speed that isn't that much can increase the injury, make it bleed more, actually make the tear worse as well. And the other thing is also, as soon as you have an injury where there's pain involved, the way that the body controls that area isn't quite as it was before that. It will restore through rehab again, but in that moment, it's not going to work that well, and you're more likely to strain it. So I've seen quite a few people who, especially with calves, thought that they just had a cramp and tried to run through it, and then they end up with a much worse injury. So my advice is if you feel something pull or pop or anything like that, it's best to just stop. It can be hard psychologically because I should know the best of everybody that I shouldn't continue. And I still try to walk it off, see, can I do a little jog? And then I had to do a reality check and just say, stop. So you have to get over that mental thing. Also, the problem is because I stopped early, the strain wasn't that bad. So 2 days later, I was already feeling much better. And I was starting to think that, oh, today is my long run day. I wonder if I can do it. But luckily, sanity prevailed and I left it for another day until I had no more symptoms. And then I tried a run walk and that worked. So tomorrow I can try a run again and just continue with my rehab. And that's the thing I want to get at with this is it doesn't mean you've got to stop all sports and all activity, but you have to understand what level of load and type of sport or activity your injured part can cope with at this point. Because even for tendon injuries like a tendinopathy or tendinitis, where there isn't a tear, if you're going to try and do too much exercise on it, you can actually make the injury worse or you can make it flare up quite dramatically. So it's important whenever you injure something that you figure out what level of activity it can currently cope with that allows it to actually recover while you're staying active. And that's the type of thing that a physio can help you with and where it's really useful to see a physio about that. And it's also one of the things we do for our online patients because we all like sports, so we understand If you can't do it, it drives you nuts. And there's usually stuff that people can continue with to just help their fitness and maintain things. Massage is quite an important one to talk about because I often find, especially when people have torn their muscles, that they go and they try to foam roll it afterwards because, again, they think that it's just a cramp or something like that. And then they make it much, much worse. And the reason for that is if you think of anything that you've pulled or strained or torn, it forms like an internal scab. And you know how a scab initially is not very strong. So if you're going to put strong pressure over that area, you can actually make the bleeding worse. You can just make everything really, really angry in there. So especially within the first week or two after a muscle strain, I would stay away from strong massage. Yes, of course, you can ease into things after that, but you could also massage the areas around it. Like, for instance, if you've torn your calf muscle, nothing's stopping you from doing some foam rolling on your hamstrings to help that area. But I just wouldn't do it on the calf at that point. Or you can do some ice massage, maybe where you use a small piece of ice that you massage the calf, but no strong pressure because that will likely make it worse. And for tendons, tendinopathy, tendinitis, we know there's not a tear there, but what happens is, especially if it's in the really irritated phase or has recently flared up, if you go and really rub that, then it can really make the tendon just more angry and make it flare up. So it's best to avoid strong pressure over the tendon, but you can absolutely massage the muscles and things around it. The other thing that you really want to avoid strong pressure for is if you have a condition where inflammation is the main driver of the injury. So we're thinking bursitis specifically. So the back of the heel often gets Achilles bursitis, where it's really swollen, red, you can see it's inflamed. If you go and have strong pressure over that now, it will just make it worse because often it's actually strong pressure that's caused the injury there. What other areas? Hip bursitis, same thing there. If you have strong pressure over that, and the hip tendons are also prone to flaring up quite badly, the gluteal tendons, if you have too strong massage over those areas. So early days, best to avoid the painful area. You can massage around it. But later on, it's absolutely fine to ease into massage, but always start lighter rather than stronger and check how it reacts in the 24 hours after. I wish I could fit the S for stretching in earlier in this video because it's nearly one of the most important things to avoid during those early days especially. And the reason being for pulls and strains or tears, I hope it's obvious that with those type of injuries, you've torn some muscle fibers as well as blood vessels. And if you're now going to pull on it because you're stretching the area, you're just going to pull it further apart and you're unlikely to make the injury much worse, so the tear worse, because you're not going to stretch, hopefully, hard enough. But you will likely irritate it more and make it hurt more later. And that's the tricky bit because sometimes it can feel really good while you're doing it, but then an hour or two later, it can really flare up. Same thing with the massage, actually. It's often later on that it can flare up more. So if you've had a torn muscle or a pulled muscle or even a ligament or a tendon, it's really best not to start stretching it too early. Of course, it's an important part of the treatment process later on in the rehab, but during that first week or two, not a good idea. And your physio will tell you when it is safe to start stretching. Muscles, you can usually start some gentle stretches within a week or two and ease into stronger ones. With torn tendons, it's usually much longer because they recover so much more slowly. So it's best to get guidance on that. Then if we think of overuse injuries like tendinopathy or tendinitis, yes, there's nothing to stretch apart, but stretching an irritated tendon often also just makes it worse. And especially if it's an insertional tendinopathy, like your insertional Achilles tendinopathy or your proximal hamstring, your high hamstring tendons where they're attached to the sit bone. Taking those muscles then into a stretch position actually wraps the tendon around the bone, compressing it strongly as well. And it's a bit like pressing on a bruise. It can really make it feel worse later. The reason people try to stretch these out is because things can feel so tight. But it's actually the injured tendon that's making things feel tight and making the muscles tighten up. And by stretching it, yes, you can get it to relax for a while, but it usually just comes back worse. And it can often be the reason why the pain is continuing. So doing foam rolling in the case of tendinopathies or tendinitis for the muscle that affects that tendon is a much better option usually. Even massage, that you go to a therapist for some massage on the muscle belly, but avoiding the injured tendon, can be a really good solution. Brilliant. Hope you found that useful. If you've got any questions, just ask them in the comments. And if you need more help with your injury, you're welcome to consult one of the team via video call. The link to the website is also in the description of this video. Take care.